It's always a bit
Okay.
weird. This is backstage, but it's on
I know.
stage at the same time.
Exactly. So we're like, okay, we're just waiting and seeing what happens. Well, we've got a fair number of people already in, so I think it's just after 2. Maybe we'll just go ahead. So on behalf of APTA, I would really like to welcome all of you here to our final webinar of our day. I think we've seen almost everybody already today with our time with, oh dear, boy, I think I had my nap, but it didn't help very much. Jane McGraw this morning, and then we had our AGM, and then people have been chatting and seeing the Young Composers program. So it's been a full day for some people already, but I'm really looking forward to hearing what Philip has to say. And I think as piano teachers, this is a topic that is near and dear to our hearts, as we're all about 3 weeks into the year and we're starting to do the you really need to practice routine with some of our kids. So, so I'm looking forward to what Philip has to say. And I think, Philip, I'm just going to go ahead and go ahead and welcome very much to APTA, all the way from across the world.
All right, listen, thank you very much. Before we start, I'll just share screen and make sure that's actually working and doing all of that.
Okay.
And so perfect. If it is, you should be seeing 3 dots right now. How are we doing?
That's exactly what we're seeing.
That's exactly right. Okay, that's fine. All right. So listen, just before we start any of this at all, can I just give a big shout out to Joan Blanche for reasons that you are seriously underestimating. So she's been trying to organize this for quite some time. Just putting a number on that for a moment. Joan, your first email to me was in 2009. That was the first time that she was suggesting that maybe I should speak to people. And the big obstacle was I don't like aeroplanes very much, and some idiot put Australia a long way from anywhere. So COVID has actually helped a little bit because now we're a bit more comfortable with Zoom than we used to be, and so we can do this. The point of today, though, is it's a little bit strange. I've given presentations before about books I've written. I have never given a presentation on a book I haven't written yet. And so just with a few warnings before we start, for those of you who are involved with software or computer gaming at all, you'll be familiar with the idea of early access, where you can sort of have a look at something long before it launches, with the caveat that it's very, very likely to change. So I have no idea how much of what I'm about to tell you is likely to appear in the book. I'm not even 100% certain the book would appear necessarily. Although if it were to, I am 100% sure that the second idea that we talk about today would appear. In fact, that may end up being a book in its own right. But in any case, for those of you who haven't read the original book, doesn't matter too much. I'm a big fan of my own work, but it's 20 years ago. And hence the kind of the thought of the rewrite. And 20 years is starting to become a problem. And so just have a look at this. Now, to put some context, this tablet PC that you're looking at right now was launched the year after Practice Revolution came out. It weighs 3.5 pounds, and it feels like a lot more than that when it's in your hand. It will not connect to broadband, but I'm pretty sure there wasn't a lot of broadband to connect to. You can't download music on it. You can't do streaming video because at this stage, YouTube hadn't been invented yet. Neither had Facebook, neither had Gmail, neither had Instagram. All of the following words meant something different: like, subscribe, and follow. And I don't think the word emoji meant anything at all. And of course, if I wanted to find out whether it did in that year, I could Google that. But I promise you, back when Practice Revolution was released, that idea didn't make any sense either. Now, the reason I'm telling you all of this, these aren't just all technical and technological curiosities. These are things that mean that the people we're working with are absolutely thinking completely differently from the students that we were working with at the time they wrote the book. So there's a lot in Practice Revolution that's still relevant in 2021. I think there's a lot that'll still be relevant in 2051. But there's just too much that's possible now that it doesn't talk about, and so it's crying out for a rewrite. So this presentation is a cross-section of where my thinking is up to. And again, it may well change completely. We'll see. So today, the plan is in around 45 minutes from now, and I'm hoping you've all got phones or iPads or something handy. It's not the end of the world if you don't, but if you do, in around about 45 minutes from now, there'll be a Q&A session, but this is a two-way Q&A session. So I'll actually be asking some questions as well. And if you do have a phone handy, any answer that you post will be able to appear real time, and we can kind of see all of that. But before we do any of that, though, we're going to run a thought experiment. So I want you to imagine that you're grateful students, and they have plenty to be grateful for. have banded together to organise you a holiday. Now, you need to use your imagine. We have to put COVID to one side for a moment and imagine that you'd actually want to go on holiday, but let's pretend it's gone and you do. And this is the view, and it's not a bad view. And so you've got 2 weeks at wherever this resort is, not thinking about piano teaching or anything else in particular. However, your students have not been straight with you. They have not told you anything close to the full truth, because while you're away, this is what's happening to your studio. Only you don't know about this. And in a moment, we're going to take a tour of the result of all of that. Now, a little bit like one of these reality television shows, and I'm assuming you have them in Canada. We have plenty of them here, where you send people away for a weekend and then somebody renovates your house and you come back and you react to it. Designing all of this, we've got a panel. So we've got an elite sports coach. I don't know who's who on here, but we've got an elite sports coach. We've got a behavioral economist is in there somewhere. There is a sound engineer in there. There is a computer game designer. And importantly, there is a parent in there. This is somebody who's got 3 kids who've all gone through piano lessons and has somebody who has witnessed a total of 22 years of piano practice. And so that they know a thing or two about it in a way that I would contest that most music teachers can only imagine. So this is our panel: sports coach, behavioral economist, sound engineer, computer game designer, and a parent who really has been at the pointy end of all of this. And so the scenario is that fresh from your 2 weeks away, you just arrived back, your blindfold has been taken off because they're making this all dramatic for television. And I think the producer at this point is hoping for tears and a big reaction from you. But I think your first thought is very likely to be, what have you done to my studio? All right, let's just take a look. So this is what's new. We have a practice center, and I don't think most piano studios have this. I'm definitely not recommending that they would, but work with me. Let's imagine this were to exist. The idea behind this facility is this is a place where all of your students would go to do 100% of their practice. And the reason that they would is absolutely everything they could ever want for ideal practice, whatever that might mean. It's all available, and it's available in these centers. And if it looks like this lobby is pretty big, it's big because you've got all of your students coming in and out every day. They probably had to demolish your kitchen and your living areas for all this, but it's all for a good cause. If we head inside now, so down the corridors here to the practice rooms on the first floor, which is where the students will be spending most of their time. But it's not really the first floor I'm interested in. It's the second floor, because on the second floor, we've got these specialist buildings. And these are what I want to talk about for the first part of the session today. Now, none of what's inside these rooms would have been possible when Practice Revolution was being written. Unless you were a multimillionaire, it may have been possible. Now, all of this is actually relatively easy if you're looking out for it. And the takeaway from today's presentation is that any ideas that you like from today, you actually can implement pretty much immediately, and without depending on a particular or specific product or brand or gadget. It's just stuff that you probably already have. So let's start with room 201, which is sort of intriguingly named the Performance Labs. Now, any sports coach would be very familiar with what we're about to find inside here, and would be a little bemused by the idea that we send our wards off to work and to practice and prepare without this stuff. But piano teachers really are coaches. And that's why we had an elite sports coach on our panel before. And all of these sports coaches can do something that music teachers can't, because they have tools that help their students visualize exactly what it is that they're doing while they're working. So I'll give you an example. We're looking here at some tennis players, and you can clearly see the forearm, the angle of the forearm prior to the serve, the positioning of the feet. There's sight lines to the ball toss. And in case the student can't see all of these things, you can annotate it. And then immediately they're looking at the same thing that you're looking at. And what's interesting here is not that the information's available. It means that sports coaches can work in a completely different way to music teachers. So the work loop for music teachers is usually a variation on this, and you'll all recognize it. The student will play something. They'll turn to you and they'll kind of wait for feedback. You'll give them the feedback. You'll tell them ways in which it could be better. They may or may not have heard exactly the same thing, or even remember the playing that they were doing just then that triggered that reaction from you, but they'll take your word for it. They'll play it again. They'll turn to look to you. You'll give some more feedback, and so the loop continues. And so that they're highly dependent on this moment where they hear from you what it was that they just did. Now, for our sports coach working with technology like this, the loop is a little bit different. The student will do something. And then once the student's done something, because you've captured it like this and we've got some analysis, both the student and the coach together come and look at exactly the same thing. It's a completely different way of working. It's teaching on the same side of the desk effectively. And in the end, students who work this way end up being better able to coach themselves because they absolutely can work with this stuff by themselves as well. And looking at the pictures here, it's not actually that complicated or sophisticated to get your head around the mechanics of what it is that you're looking at. Now, this is already in widespread use in sports. So to show you how widespread, this is a screenshot from an app that is so old it doesn't exist now. It's just been discontinued, but it's there are plenty of competitors. And the point is that it's applicable in just about every sport, which means you see it in just about every sport, because all you need to be able to do as a coach is simple things. You need to be able to circle things or draw lines. And we can all do that. But then straight away, the very fact that there's a circle on here, I don't know anything at all about baseball. I'm not even 100% sure that this could be softball for all I know. But right now I'm focused on the grip because that's where the circle has sent my eyes. And as a student, they won't necessarily know what legato is, but there are ways of getting them to care about the same things that you're caring about, if only you can make it a little more self-evident what the item actually is in the first place. Look, another example now from some of you might know if you the introduction somewhere. I'm not teaching piano these days. I taught piano for 20 years. These days I run a martial arts school and teach lots of students at the same time. And one of the gadgets that we use in there is there's a thing called a power cube, and it's a box that the students hit. And when they hit it, it tells them how hard they hit it. And it measures reaction times and speed and a whole bunch of other things as well. And it means that when I'm working with them, we get information like this. Now, that's good for a couple of reasons. It means we end up with, this is easy to turn into leaderboards and other things that they care about. But the real reason it's useful is that where I'm wearing my teaching hat and when down the track they're wearing their practicing hat, we're able to measure in real time the impact of suggestions that are being made in a concrete way where they can actually see the results. So I can assert to them as much as I like in the absence of this, that rotating your hip when you're throwing a particular punch will make you throw the punch more powerfully. Or we can measure it before the advice, give the advice, drill it a few times, bring it back to the machine, and then watch the numbers be higher. And the student is significantly, again, big fan though I am of my own advice during the sessions, they are much more likely to be listening to that in the first place when they can actually see tangible evidence. And so pretty much any sport can point to things like this. There's nothing like this for musicians, except there is. It's been everywhere all around us, probably now for the better part of a decade. Most of us have it, we just don't use it. And so it would look a little bit like this. This is the symbol that everybody should be caring about. And all of you will recognize it as a record button. And as long as you've got a MIDI-enabled piano or keyboard, and you've got a digital audio workstation, which is a very fancy word for do you have GarageBand or something similar, or Logic or Cubase or Studio One, which a lot of you are working with. And if you're not, you absolutely want to get to know. But they're very inexpensive. Some of them even start off as being free, and they all feature this. Now, we know how this works already. There's no surprises here. The student hits record, they play something, and then you can both play it back and you can both listen to it. Now, so far, there's no big deals because you could do that with a cassette recorder in 1985 if you wanted to. And some of the people I'm talking to now will have been doing this in the studios. What's different here, though, is that if you are hitting play and then you're listening to what's just happened, you're thinking like a performer. If we can think like a composer instead, suddenly all that stuff that we saw for the sports opens up, both for the teacher in the studio and for the student in the practice room when they're working by themselves. Right, and it works a little bit like this. So what we're going to do is we're going to record a G major scale, and we're going to see what a composer sees when that's done. Right, I'm not actually going to play a G major scale. We're going to pretend I've just played one. And those of you who've worked with these programs will be expecting to see this now. And just in 30 seconds, for those who haven't worked with this before, just a quick orientation as to what we're looking at here. And again, this is designed mostly for composers, but it's just too good for teachers to ignore. These rectangles here correspond to each note that you played. And you can see that they're gradually going up because the scale gradually went up. And in fact, if you look to the left of your screen, you can see the notes they're talking about. Of all the information this gives, the notes the student plays is the one that we're going to care about least, because you can usually hear that for yourself when it's wrong. It's when everything else is not right that it's a little bit harder to hear. So these rectangles will tell you where each note starts, where each note stops. The vertical lines that you can see that you can see some of them in light blue, and there's a yellow one every so often. These are beats and the start of each new measure. And then the color here will tell you how loud the note is. And so it scales, I mean, depending on the program you've got, we end up with light blue for very quiet, through to green, through to eventually towards the top, we end up with browns. And I think red is when things are getting really loud. All right, so how in a million years is this useful, and why do I think that all students should be working with this in studios, not all the time, but as a tool that you can pull out when you need it and then have available to them when they're practicing it? We can use this to diagnose issues just as surely as a radiologist diagnoses things by looking at their diagrams. And so this scale here, this G major scale, what we're looking at here is a thumb bump. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. We've all heard it a million times. And when the thumb passes under, it passes under in a fairly unwieldy way, and it hits the note harder than it should. Now, again, we can assert that to the student, and a lot of the students we assert that to will hear that straight away. More than a few of them won't, but they'll nod anyway. We won't always know the difference. What this represents is another way, an additional way of communicating the same information. And so we can tell them, what do you notice here? One of these notes is a different color. We talk them through the reason for that. Brown means that's too loud. Well, I want a scale where all the notes are green, all right? That means all the notes are going to be quiet. The thing that you need to watch here is the fourth note in the scale. It's your thumb. Let's try it again. Let's make it a green. And so you play it through again, and instantly, the color almost certainly will change, because the student will be trying to think about making their thumb a little bit quieter. And then the extent to which they're successful is not the result of an abstract conversation. It's the result, it's metrics. Both the student and the teacher are looking at the same thing. And so if this is on your laptop, what will often happen is that the instant the student's played, they're invested in this. And so you spin the laptop around, they want to see it, because they want to know, how did I do just then? And of course, this is a thing that they can do at home as well. Now, and this is thumb bumps, and that's one particular thing. We're going to look at half a dozen different examples now. And then at the end, just to prove that you've mastered this, before we move on to some other rooms, there's a short exam just to prove that you are a master of this, and that you can read these charts as surely as a radiologist can read X-rays, except this, I think this is a good deal easy to read. And your student should be able to too. So moving on to this one now. What's this telling us? Again, remember, vertical lines on here are the beats. All right, the rectangles, you can see where each note starts and each note stops. And in this particular scale, with the metronome having been running in the background, this student is early. And it's not just that the student's early, you can see how much they're early and which particular notes they're early. And then again, straight away, we've got a springboard for a conversation, and also a clear metric for what success looks like when they fix this. Success looks like these notes are lined up with the grid instead of anticipating the grid each time. And so if we can just nudge these to the right a little bit, then you're playing more in time with the metronome. And it might be that the student is unable otherwise to hear this, but because now we're having a conversation where they can actually see the result, if that's the way they figure it out, then so be it. That's all right. Let's move on to another one. All right, here we are, same scale, different student, different issue. These notes mostly seem to be starting dead on time. I'm not seeing a note which is a different color, significantly different color, and jumping out from the rest. So there's no thumb bumps to worry about here, but right up the top, fingers 4 and 5 are collapsing into each other. And again, we've seen this lots of times. This is what it looks like when it's being rendered as sports coaching metrics. Moving on to the next one now. Again, just take a moment, see if you can figure out what this is looking at, run through the stuff you know already. And so most of these notes are starting when they should. The colors are reasonably consistent. The issue here is this is what not legato playing looks like. And so these notes are finishing before the next note begins. And again, it's an idea that you'll try to communicate in lots of different ways, and we all have, and some students get it and some students won't. Now you've got an extra way to communicate it. And you can take it further. So what does legato look like? Legato looks like this. And so the demonstration which you then give, or which you can actually create simply by dragging these notes out and making those longer, we'll come back to that in a second. Now they've actually got a picture of what the finish line looks like. Now we can spend the next 3 or 4 minutes going away and getting them to try to construct this. And after every time they record it, we can, again, spin the laptop around and they can see how they did. Let's switch to a two hands together scale now. And again, have a think about what this is telling us. And if it's starting to feel like this is not hard to read, it's because it's really not hard to read. So again, vertical lines for the beats, start and the ends of notes. Colors will tell you a thing or two there, but this all looks fairly even. This, if you trace your eyes down these vertical lines, is what it looks like when students are playing two hands together, but the hands aren't synced up. And so you can see the right hand notes are being anticipated by the left hand notes. And more often than not, though, the left-hand notes are actually falling after the beat. And so there's two things that we can do here. First of all, you'll leave immediately with a sense, if you're just listening to this, you'll know that the hands aren't synchronized, but answering the question, so how aren't they synchronized? What's happening first? That can be a little bit difficult to ascertain. And the only way, in the absence of this, of being able to answer a question like that, is to ask the student to play it again, at which point they'll probably play something different. And so here what we've got frozen in time is a snapshot of exactly what it was that they did a moment ago, and that we can see if you look at all the notes in the second half of this, the notes down the bottom, the left-hand notes, they all seem to be a little bit after the line. The right hand seems to be mostly on top. So I know two things now. First of all, this is probably not just a synchronization issue. I'm going to want to spend some time working on left-hand practice. You might have your own solutions for this particular diagnosis, but the point is we're all seeing the same diagnosis here. Let's move on to the next one. There's a couple more of these. What would this sound like? I don't actually think a student, I engineered this. I don't think a student would play this, but see if you can kind of describe in your head what you'd be expecting to hear here. I'm expecting a few things. First of all, I'm expecting colossal accents on the first note and the fifth note. I don't know why. The right hand is staccato, pretty much. Left hand is nice legato. Left and right hand notes, again, are not synced. So again, it's not hard to tell what's going on. All right, so exam time before we move on. Just to prove that you are the master of this, we have, I think is that K5, 545 at the top, I think it is Mozart, rendered as we normally would see it. Down the bottom is what the student just played. We've spun the laptop around. And again, I'm not proposing in a million years that you replace the lessons that you usually do by doing this 100% of the time. I'm saying have the laptop on standby so that any time other things feel like they're not communicating, then this is another way that you can do it. So I'll give you 20 seconds or so just to have a look and see what you could extract. What advice would you give the student from all of these rectangles? I'd play some thinking music if I had it, but I don't. All right. Let's start by trying to figure out what's what. Looking at all these rectangles down the bottom half, they're the left hand. Looking at the rectangles in the bottom half that are at the top, you can see they're slightly more brown than the other notes. That's your thumb. In this Alberta bass, the student is absolutely belting their thumb, and we've all heard that lots of times before. The right hand up here is the part that's got the tune. That's the bit, if anything, should be a different color and towards the darker end of the spectrum. That's what we'd like to see, towards the darker end of the spectrum, but it's not. It's just as quiet as the quietest notes in the left hand. So this student has a balance problem. And again, the idea of balance problem can be a bit abstract. The idea of, I want dark colors in your right hand, light colors in your left hand, is something that they can immediately visualize. This Alberta bass, where the thumb is thumping, that's not the only problem in here. If we look at the grid lines, you can see it's all over the place. It is nowhere close to being even. And so I can see some left-hand practice just trying to even that out in the student's future. And the student is more likely to accept that that sort of practice should be in their future because they've just seen concrete evidence of how skewed it all is. And otherwise, you can see towards the end, if you look at the melody in the right hand now, in the second half, again, look for the rectangles which are up the top. You can see some that overlap significantly. So these are fingers that are not only collapsing into each other, but we've got a third finger which is actually staying down. That B in the second bar is staying down through the C and the D. And so that's going to end up sounding muddy in a way that might otherwise have us blaming pedaling. The pedal might not even be down at the moment. Now, whichever, I said before, there's lots of programs. The program that you use might not look like this. I haven't even named this program because that's not the point. In other programs, you can get other information. In fact, in this program, you can get this information as well. What we're looking at here, this is just simply written out whatever the student played. That's not so interesting. What is interesting is it's also put in the pedals. And so you can see exactly when it was that the student placed the pedal down and when it was that they lifted up. If you want to get more granular about that, and I haven't got a screenshot for this, but you can actually represent that with numbers so that you can actually see exactly when it is in the bar that the pedal's going down. And so instead of just telling them, look, I think this is later than it should be, and you're still the change is later than it should be, and you're catching the previous notes, you can actually see it for yourself. Final one now. This from a program that is just released in the past month. It's for iPad. For those of you who've used Sibelius or Finale before, there's a brilliant alternative called Dorico, which I've switched to now. And the iPad version of that features this graph down the bottom. It's a histogram, which you may have seen in photography before. what this is showing you is the distribution of how loud the student's playing was. And so again, that all sounds a bit nerdy and abstract, except it's really not. I'm not seeing anything which is at the really quiet end of the spectrum or the really loud end of the spectrum. This is a performance where everything has very safely taken place in the center. And so again, I've got a springboard for a conversation. I want you to record this again. I want these bars this time to be just as an exercise. I want these bars all over the place. I want some notes that are crazy quiet, some other notes that are crazy loud. So we're distributing this a little bit more evenly. And what that translates to for the audience, that's more interesting to listen to. So anyway, a different perspective, same material. We have actually been able to do this probably for the past 10 or 15 years. I'm just pretty sure that most of us haven't been. So 4 reasons this is a game changer before we leave the performance labs behind and head into the second room in all of this. The first reason is the whole new dimension it brings to teaching concepts. So I can remember when I was first being introduced to legato, I really didn't get it, except that my teacher knew that it wasn't present. And so she actually played on my arm so that I could feel the fingers staying down. I didn't quite get that either. Sometimes we'll explain things by talking about what it sounds like. Sometimes we'll explain things in terms of metaphors. It just means now, in the most intensely visual age in history, when students are much more used to interpreting graphs and charts and metrics than we ever were, courtesy of computer games. So my son learned to read and learned to navigate a map by playing World of Warcraft when he was 4. And we can leave to one side whether that makes me a good parent or not. But the point is he could interpret maps when he was 4 years old because he'd been deeply immersed in that. And so now when everything is so visual like that, we've got an extra way to be able to show them, and it's a way that they actually understand fairly readily. And if that means that they understand, again, how to produce legato simply by making the graph conform, long before they're able to hear it or feel it, then so be it. The point is we've got a mechanic now where they're able to produce it, and then while they're producing it, they'll gradually get used to these other senses where they can feel it as well. So that's the first. The second of the 4 reasons. This is feedback when you can't be there. The loop that I described before was 100% dependent on having the teacher in the room. The student plays, they spin around, and what did you think? And at home, that is, unless I've got parents who are qualified that way, that is absolutely missing. And so students just kind of plow on and they do their own thing, and there's no feedback beyond their own developing feedback. And of course, the long-term game here is for students not to need gadgets or graphs or whatever, is for them to be able to hear this in real time. And of course, in time they will. But in the meantime, while they're developing it, if you're not there and something like this is not there, the question you've got to ask is, how are they able to tell how they're doing? And I would contest that most of the time they can't, which is often why you can throw a lot of time at practice and it doesn't necessarily make things better. And don't start me on that. So the how did I do loop now has been subverted, and the student is able to actually work independently. It gives you as the teacher a whole new way of being able to set practice challenges. And so instead of saying, play this passage 50 times in a row every day, please, or until you can manage it at crotchet equals 120. We've all got different ways of being able to set challenges. You can say, send me a screenshot when your graph looks like this. And so the student will go home and they'll try and they'll try and they'll try and they'll fail a lot of the time, but somewhere along the line, it'll end up resembling that. When they do, bang, off they go. They can just email it to you straight away. And or you might say to them, play me a 3-octave scale where every single note in the scale is a tiny bit louder than the note before. Now that's the sort of thing that as an aspiration, we've always been able to issue, but being able to measure it requires some way of being able to measure it. And so with these sorts of graphs, you could actually see, because not only do these bars we were talking about before, not only can be assigned a color to tell how loud things are, you can assign a number between 1 and 128 or 0 and 127, depending on what you're working with. And so that challenge there, the student will be able to see whether the numbers are climbing or whether halfway through, no, this thing did dip, in which case they go back. And you don't care so much about the numbers. What you care about is that you want students practicing so that they're establishing this connection between this fine motor control so that they can produce 100 different shades of piano and pianissimo. And now they've got a way of being able to tell whether they're doing that. The fourth way is that because the information is digital, it almost always can be improved, whatever they come up with. And this is for your students who are that way inclined, that they just want to keep on setting themselves challenges. You want to match those colors, or you want to match those numbers. How precise can you actually get? All right, if you're trying to place a rhythm dead in time, because this is one of these pieces where precision just really matters. Rhythmic precision really matters. Then how close to this grid can you get? And when you're setting a nap challenge, you can do what I didn't show you before. And that is, of course, this slider here, we can zoom in. You can zoom into thousandths of a second if you want it. And at some point, the student's actually going to fall short. But it means that this is always extensible and you can always issue fresh challenges. The converse of that is, because you have control over the extent to which things zoom, for example, if need be, with students who need the positive stroke, but there being lies, damn lies, and statistics, you can actually maybe zoom out a little bit and you can represent the information so that it actually looks a little better than it actually is. And I'm not recommending that, except you all know it's a good idea from time to time. So there we are. I'll finish this room with this following controversial statement, and please don't abandon the session after this. But I said before, I'm not teaching piano at the moment. I will probably return at some point. I taught piano for 20 years, and I probably will return at some point. The studio at the moment is set up mostly to run my martial arts business. But if I were to set it up again from scratch from teaching and I could only have one piano, I would not have an acoustic piano. And further, I'd be insisting that my students had digital pianos as well. Down the track, when the action and all of those things really truly matter because it's a Chopin concerto they're playing and not my funny donkey, then at that point we might have conversations about how we need to shift. But prior to that, there's just too much that I can do when I'm able to get real-time feedback that I just can't do with an acoustic piano. It's just too good for teaching with. So anyway, I'll leave that with you. And we got some questions later on. I might even serve that question and find out whether you think I'm mad or not. I haven't done it yet, except that I have, in that the only pianos I own now are digital. All right, let's move on to the next one. I might even give an opportunity to ask a couple of questions after the second room, I think. All right. Before we could go into the second room, if the book could only make one point, it would make this point coming up now. And I said before, this might end up being a book in its own right. I feel pretty strongly about this. Some context. We need to do some time travel, not to 2002, but way, way, way back in music history. The big problem that I think we're fighting with practicing is not the mechanics of practice. It's this. The only way to be heard in the vast majority of the history of music, the only way for musicians to be heard, and for most of that time, the only way for audiences ever to hear music was for it to be live, which means it has to be in real time. And whatever happens, happens, whether it's good or bad. There's no undo buttons. And whatever happens fades. And almost immediately the performance is done, only lives on, again, for better or for worse, in the memories of those who are actually physically in that space. And this has been true for the longest time. And it's the tradition we've inherited. And it is shaping almost everything that we do when we're teaching. And it shouldn't. Let's move forwards in time a little bit. Different instruments now, different format. We've got lists sitting there. Adoring audience looking at it. The scale's a bit bigger audiences. Same principle though, once the last note's gone, the performance is gone. Again, this is live. It's a high wire act. And these people here who are looking so impressed at him, again, the only time they can hear music is when it's live, which means that this is quite possibly the third or the fourth time they've heard high-level piano playing in their lives. For a lot of them, it'll be the first time. And so I would contest they're actually more easily impressed than some audiences today. In fact, speaking of audiences today, we move forwards in time. Subtle change in modern times. First change is this audience has countless ways of hearing music. They're listening to this guy now, but they've also heard Horowitz and Rubinstein and Janie Kissen. And they are a whole lot harder to impress. And, you know, it could just be a selective photograph here, but they're looking harder to impress right now. But still, for the majority of people, up until recently, the only way the performer can be heard is live. And so they depend on this instant where there's an intersection between them. They need to be in the same space with the audience. And so again, it's real time, it's one shot, and whatever happens, happens, and it's high stress. And so the goals that we set for students mirror this. in fact. So we prepare them for recitals and competitions and auditions and exams, all of which are real-time, one-shot live performance type things. And it's not for everybody. In fact, most people find it very stressful. Now, I'm just going to stop screen sharing just for a moment now, just to set something up. I am, with apologies, about to show you a video that's about 30 seconds long. Some of you may have actually seen it before, but then we'll talk about what I think is really going on here. So just excuse me a moment just while I prepare this. Just need to make sure you're hearing the same thing that I'm hearing. Okay, that's better. All right. Okay. Can I just quickly check? Are we seeing a person sitting at a piano? I can't hear anybody.
I think you might need to share it again.
Is it sharing?
No.
It's not. Okay, give me a second.
There we go.
There we go. Okay, all right. So let's go to that. All right. Okay. It's not just the performer who gets stressed. It's everybody in their orbit. So it's teachers and parents and siblings and strangers. And I'm not saying this happens every single time. We've all got students who absolutely love it up there and everything goes well. We also don't have a lot of students. These are students who long since stopped learning, and part of the reason that they do is because they don't enjoy this kind of equivalent of public speaking part of things, except it ends up being the core of what we do. Listen partly to the person playing the piano, listen mostly to the person with the camera, and then we'll talk about it. This is why I would end up writing a new book. Just leaving it there for a moment with the parent just urging their student on, and part of the reason we watched all of that just then is that everybody here will be able to relate to that. The frustrating thing for me as a teacher, and it will be for you as well, is that this is not necessarily what it looks like. This is not a student who is maybe not prepared. They're probably not prepared, but this also might be a student who has absolutely nailed this at home and has nailed this in lessons, and is simply being overwhelmed by the enormity of where they are right now. And it's not for everybody. And what it means in the end is, because we know that there's going to be a moment with a spot like this, where everything comes down to whether we get it right at the time or not, we walk away with the regrets for the phrasing we didn't do or the notes that we missed, is that it shapes our practice mindset. And we end up practicing not to excel. We end up practicing so we don't mess up. And that's a very, very different thing. And it is absolutely not true of everybody who practices. I want to show you this by contrast. So not far from our house, there's a place where people can go to skate. This is, because I don't have permission to use photo of the student. This is not that student. This is not that place, but you get the idea. And I was walking and watching somebody on the skateboard trying their various tricks. And they missed a lot. They landed, I think, probably about 5 out of 10 attempts, I would think. And it occurred to me at the time that what they were doing was practicing. I mean, they were looping things and trying to improve their skills and all of those good things. If a piano were present, it would have looked like piano practice. But what's going on in their head? If it was an assembly performance that they were preparing for, where they had to execute this trick, and the assembly performance was in 3 weeks' time, and they knew they had one chance and they had to nail it, landing 5 out of 10 attempts will kind of represent a 50% chance of screwing it up on performance day. Now, I don't know whether that metric is accurate or not, but certainly you can see how that would be in the back of your head. Every time you're missing it, in the back of your head is, I don't want this to happen on the day. It's going to need some more practice. But this skateboarder wasn't operating like that. What the skateboarder had set up was a camera, and they'd got it 5 times, they'd missed it 5 times, and in the back of their head wasn't, of these 5 times, it wasn't the 5 times I've missed now means I'm not ready for something. In the back of their head would have been, great, I've got 5 good takes I can use for the video I'm trying to put together. And at the end of all of this will be, I promise you, a video of them absolutely nailing this, which means we've captured a moment in time of them at their very best. And why on earth is that not our focus with the people that we are responsible to? And so it means that when you're practicing towards a recording, rather than practicing towards it always having to be something live in one shot, you can remove the fear of sticking the landing, and you can concentrate instead on what you're doing in the air. And it's a whole different way of thinking about every second of your working, of why you're working and how you're working, and not trivially, how you're feeling about music and yourself and life in general and what's coming up while you're working. And it's why room 202 is the most important. So, and by the way, for those of you looking at the clock, recognizing there is absolutely no way known that we're going to get through all 6 rooms inside of about 4 hours. That's true. And I'm going to wind this up before we now, so we can take some questions. But I've front loaded this with the things that I really want you to hear. Happy to talk about the rest if we end up not getting to it. So in this idealized thought experiment, that's the sign on the door of your new recording studio. We'll just take a quick look inside. Now, remember, everything we're about to look at, you absolutely can do in your studio right now. So here's the idealized version. We have here, you can see a Bosendorf at the Steinway and the Yamaha. That's a CFX, by the way, so it's a nice piano. What you can't see, because it's out of shot, is there's a Fazioli and a Kawashi Giro as well. And on standby, we have, because you'd need them, sound engineers. We've got a tuner permanently on standby, because these things are always going slightly out of tune, and anything that's slightly out of tune in recording sounds terrible. And we have a green screen, which you can't see, set up so that we can video record and make it look like you're absolutely anywhere, which is perfect for submitting for auditions, for example, or creating YouTube videos. And of course, all of these keyboards also have got attachments so that they are MIDI enabled, so that you can capture information that way as well. And the workflow here is that this would be on standby all the time for you to record whenever. You can record whole pieces, you can record parts of pieces, and the shift ends up being from preparing for one-off concerts to building a portfolio. And the longer a student's with you, the more pieces are going to be in this portfolio, and every one of them is going to be a portrait of the student at their very best, because that's the circumstances under which we put up the recording, and we keep on recording until we get it right. You know, with anybody working in recording, that's what they would do. And so the student knows they're going to end up with a mistake-free take. They know they're going to. So that's a question of just doing enough takes. And the focus then, and all the conversations and lessons, switch subtly away from, I hope we get this right, and how can we get this right, to how do I want it to sound? You end up with students where it's not just that we're publishing the very first take they get, where they happen to get all the notes in the correct order. They might end up with 12 takes that they're actually quite proud of. And now there's a whole new conversation, which is, of these 12 takes, which one do you think is the best and why? And then the product of that conversation then informs all the playing they do down the track. If the thing that they particularly liked about this is that this wasn't metronomic, despite the fact that the temptation is it could have been, in future pieces, that's an important value for them to realize. And they can, instead of waiting until their 11th take to discover that, they can make that happen from their very first take the next time they're playing. And so things improve. Now, this is all great. I haven't costed the studio in front of us here. I think the CFX alone is $350,000 US last time I checked. So this all looks a bit expensive. And the problem is your studio and recording space looks probably a bit more like this. Now, there's nothing wrong. This is a good teaching studio. Works well for that. But for recording, it's a calamity. That's not a concert grand. It is absolutely no way known that it's perfectly in tune. And unless the tuner's van is literally still in the driveway about to leave, and that won't last long, it will be badly recorded because the microphone, you haven't spent an absolute fortune on microphones and don't know how to use them, probably. There's no post-production or mastering smarts, and I don't intend any of this as a criticism. We're piano teachers. We're not supposed to be sound engineers. And it looks like the video you take will look like it's shot in somebody's living room because it's being shot in someone's living room. And the result will sound like one of those pianos at a train station that says "Play me," And all of you will have heard recordings. We end up being disappointed by the result. It's part of the reason that we don't create portfolios. So there's a way around this. I'm going to show you a magic trick in a second, and then I'm going to explain how it's done. So this is a 30-second example, and I have to apologize because I don't have students. It's me doing the playing. I can't take credit for the sound though, because what you're listening to is a $350,000 Yamaha CFX recorded in Abbey Road Studios in London. So this is our baseline, and it's been recorded by a crack team. All right, so let's start with this as the point of comparison. 30 seconds. All right, so that is a $350,000 piano. It was recorded in Abbey Road Studios in London, but that's not where I was playing. I was playing on the instrument behind me in the room that you're looking at right now. Let's just take a closer look at some of these stills and see what's actually really going on here, because you can absolutely reproduce this. And if your plan is, particularly in a video age, to be adding or even switching to the idea of a portfolio of recordings, they really should be video recordings in a YouTube age for your students. So the first thing to notice here is that the piano is cropped. And the reason it's cropped is this is not a real piano, it's a digital piano, but I don't want that being the first thought when people are looking at this. So it ends where the strings would have started. And if I increase the lighting, you'd see there's no strings at all. You are not hearing this digital piano. I have it on as a reference point just when I'm playing. But what's out of shot is that there's an iMac. It's about 5 years old. It's not particularly fancy. And running on the iMac is a piano sample library, which some of you will have used, which is where the recording was actually made of every single note on a $350,000 instrument. And then as I play a note on my digital keyboard, it triggers that particular note just as surely as if it was there in the room in front of me, and it does it all in real time. And it all sounds like sorcery, but it's actually, the sorcery's all been done by people who are cleverer than us. And it just works. You just plug it in and you can play this. And so it's always perfectly in tune. Because these recordings, these notes are frozen in time, and they were done by first-rate sound engineers. So that's the first thing, is that the sound will always be much better than you're able to produce left to your own devices otherwise. The second thing, notice the void behind. So all you're seeing there, because again, I don't want people seeing that I'm where I am, which isn't a bedroom, converted bedroom at the moment. And so what I've done is around the walls, as I've thrown down black, I went to a material shop and just bought some black material, put that all over the walls, and then set up the lighting, spent $100 or so on lighting, so that everything just seems to fade into black. And if you're not sure how to do that, there are hundreds of YouTube videos that show you how to make things fade like this, which means, and your reward for doing that is, you're not in any particular place and time anymore. And it certainly doesn't have to be your living room anymore. So that's the second thing, is we created kind of a void for all of this. It also then throws the focus on whoever's playing. There's no distractions there. The third thing is, there's two cameras here. Now, the two cameras are not just to make things look arty and to be able to switch between the two. It means that you can make edits. And so if you are assembling a recording from a few different takes, now we've got a way of doing that without it actually jumping. Whenever you need to switch, all you do is you switch camera angles at exactly the same time. And heavens knows I do that because I play rubbish most of the time. And so I'm able to assemble bits of recordings where I didn't necessarily play rubbish, and it ends up sounding all right. Right, so now that'll sounds tricky, but really here's all the gear you need. And again, register how much of this you either already have or could easily get. You need two cameras of some sort. Now, I've put a picture of a camcorder there, but it could be two iPhones. Doesn't really matter, just two video cameras of some sort. That third icon at the top is a backdrop. And so that's your black material. Or you could use a green screen if you really wanted to. And then some reasonable lighting, which you actually will need to create the illusion. But again, you don't need to spend thousands there. You will need a digital instrument of some sort, but I may have mentioned previously that I think that's a good idea. And then a computer, PC or Mac, That doesn't need to be super, super high powered. Better if it is newer though. And then a hard drive where you actually store all these piano samples, because they're about 350 gigabytes. They're quite big. So, and then armed with all of that, you're actually able to do this. And so I'll show you one more. We'll zoom back this time to dispel the illusion. This is what's actually happening. But of course, you can't see it in shot. So this is zoomed back now. And so you can see now, there's the piano. No strings on any of this. And the sound that you hear, and I'll stop talking a second so you can hear, is definitely not coming out of this instrument. In this case, this is actually coming out of the synchron stage in Vienna, in fact, and it's a Steinway. And so one of the things they'll be able to say to students is not just let's do a recording, but what would you like to use? Would you like to use the Steinway, the Yamaha, or the the Fazioli or whatever? So, in any case, that's the how for all of this. The plan is then it would be permanently set up, ready to record any time. The pressure of a live performance is gone. And going right back to the student that triggered all of this with that video where he was performing, it all went horribly wrong, and his mum was just very gently melting down as she was filming this. Instead of that video being the one that he now, I'm certain, remembers, and the number of YouTube hits and views that's had, by the way, won't be cheering him up any, and I've contributed to that. Instead of that being the video that he remembers, the video he'd have right now would be of one of the many times that he had actually nailed it. And in fact, not only that, it would have been of the best of all of those times that he nailed it. And that video will be there for him now in 10 years, in 30 years, in 50 years for his grandkids to discover. And it paints a very, very different picture of piano lessons for a person who arguably had the same skills. So this is why I'm talking about this. I'm going to pause for a moment. There's a couple of directions we could actually take now, because I know we've got booked through a couple of hours if we need it. I am all fired up and happy for a Q&A, and so probably some questions now is a good idea. There are more rooms that I'm happy to take you through as well, and so we've got time for that as well. So I'll throw it your way for some questions for a bit now.
I'm just looking at the chat, and there's a couple of questions regarding the apps that you were talking about. Particularly, you did mention one that was the most recent. So if you have a list you can say or send to us afterwards.
I might send that so that you can actually share it with everybody.
Perfect. That would be great.
Yes. The only thing I want to speak to there is it doesn't necessarily have to be the most recent, unless it was that particular histogram that was capturing their attention. Right. Again, this technology has been able to do most of this really for 10 or 15 years. We just haven't been.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I think the shift to digital piano is probably the biggest mental shift, actually, that we might have to think about. The other question I see here, and anybody else who's watching, if you have other questions that you wanted to put up, you could do that right now into the chat or the Q&A. Someone asks, do you have recommendations for students to record at home, especially for online teachers?
Well, in an age where Zoom's been forced on us, the possibility that students could record at home, and particularly could record in high quality, would be a complete game changer. So, yes. And here's why. I was talking before about needing to be in the same space and same time to perform. Right now, when we teach, we have to as well. Now, if students are able to record, it opens up the possibility for asynchronous teaching, where a student can send you a recording, and then in your own time, you can provide feedback for it, either with a video of your own, because you're set up to do that too. So you can do a demonstration of your own, or however it is that you want to respond. The point is, it doesn't have to happen at the instant that the student submits whatever it is that they want you to react to, which means it floats outside your regular teaching timetable. So it's easy to accommodate is all.
Right.
And so the number of students you can accommodate if you're working that way from time to time, it is exponentially larger than the number of students that you could fit in if it must be 45 minutes one-on-one every week.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So a different way of thinking of it. A couple of people, sorry, a couple of people have asked about the piano samples.
Yes.
Someone says, where do you recommend getting piano samples? And someone else was
Look, I can make
about
two recommendations there. There are two companies who I believe are head and shoulders above the rest. And
Okay.
I mean, full disclosure, I'm not affiliated with either of them. I have recorded demos for one of them. So there is a company called Garriton, Garritan, and they do the Yamaha CFX, and that was the first one that you heard.
Okay.
And that's in Abbey Road Studios. And then the second company is VSL, Vienna Symphonic Library. I've done some orchestral demos for them way back. And they've recorded a bunch of pianos. So they've recorded Bosendorfer, and that was the Steinway D that you heard before as well. And so that's called synchron pianos because it's recorded in their synchron stage. And I think from memory that it's around about $300 for these products. Sometimes there's a pro level version where you get more microphone positions for $600. But the point is, there's not thousands. What can be expensive is you need a hard drive to put it on a good hard drive.
I see. So can you clarify for those of us who are like apparently really clueless about this? When you say piano samples, is this just something that, like you say, goes on a hard drive and it connects to your digital piano
So what happened is, and it would have been the most boring job in the world. A team of sound engineers went in and recorded, starting with the lowest note in the piano, the lowest note on the piano, at a whole range of different volumes and note lengths, and it takes months. And then once they've done that A, they move up, they do the same thing with B flat, and then they store all of these away. And then as you play, it retrieves the recording that matches what it is that you just play. And the test for whether it's close enough is if you go, I've got a YouTube channel where the only recording, and there's Rachmaninoff and there's Liszt and there's Chopin, there's J.S. Bach and all the regular names, but the only recordings on there are using this technology. There's no acoustic pianos anywhere, and it really can be hard to tell sometimes, most of the time.
Right. Okay.
I don't think it answered your question. What was your question?
No, actually, that did answer it. It clarified
it did.
what you
and
meant.
So it lives on your hard drive, and then by sorcery, it fetches it when it needs it. So
okay, well,
yes,
that's great. We have a question about just spelling those two companies again. I know the one was Garriton.
So we got Garriton, G, Australian vowels. You're all in trouble here. G-A for Apple.
Yeah.
Double R, I for Indigo, T-A for Apple again, and N, Garriton.
Yeah. Okay.
And that's
the second
that's the CFX, because that's the Yamaha, the type of Yamaha they recorded. There's loads of these out there. These two just happen to be really good. Okay. And then the other one is V for Victor, S for Sam, L for Lima. And that's it. And then it's synchron pianos, SYNCR. Look, I'm going to send a thing through in any case. So that you've got it with links and you've got all this. But
okay, perfect. The other question someone had is, do you recommend teachers to have a YouTube channel with their own recordings of the students for them to access?
Now I'm going to get that person to put that question on hold for about 10 minutes because there's a room I want to show you. Okay,
perfect.
Yes. So that's a really good question.
Okay. Those are the questions we've had so far. So yep. Yeah, if anybody else has questions, just add it in there and we'll try to keep up with them. But I think you could probably keep on going.
I'll keep on going. All right. Okay. Give me a sec. I'll share screen again.
Okay. I see another question, but that's okay. I think we can hold on for a little while.
All right. And here we go. All right. Let's move on a bit. Okay. The question we were asked a moment ago, by the way, is coming up in the room immediately after this. And I'm going through both these rooms reasonably quickly because they are related. Okay, so any practice suite wouldn't be complete if it didn't have a reality distortion chamber. And I'm reasonably confident that most piano teachers don't. And by the way, this is not because I'm super enlightened. I didn't have a reality distortion chamber when I was teaching piano. Again, I maybe could have. And so I've described this as aspirational parallel possibilities, which is by way of trying to make this clearer. And I don't think it does that at all, so I might explain it. So the whole point here is to introduce a little augmented reality into the practice room. And it's a different way of modeling improvements. By the way, you seen the PowerPoint again, yes?
Yes.
Yes, that's fine. It's a whole new way of modeling improvements that we want to see in students playing. So that there's two ways at the moment that we really can model things. So the first way is to say, look, you are currently playing this Mozart sonata. Well, if Janie Kissen's played this Mozart sonata as well, and so here's an example of best practice. Go and watch this video, listen to his phrasing. His phrasing is very good. Well, that's true. It is, but it's also very good in a million other ways, and is unlike what the student just did in a million other ways as well, and unobtainable in just as many of those ways. And so it's a little bit like improving a student's poetry by reading them some Shakespeare. I mean, it's good for them, but the original poem is a little removed from the target. The second way rhymes with that, but has similar problems. The second way is what we do most of the time, which is the live demonstration. And it starts with a very short conversation like this, depending on how many pianos you've got. So if you're teaching with one, hop up for a second. Let me show you the staccato here. And so we can kind of see this in flight here, maybe. Now, the problem is we are not piano students. We are piano teachers, and we play piano pretty well. And so when we fix this and play the passage again, it's not just the staccato we're fixing. We're fixing a whole bunch of other things. We can't help it. And so the rhythm will be better, tighter. The phrasing will be better. The pedaling, if there is any, will be better. The dynamics will make more sense. And so in the mix somewhere is the fact that the staccato has been fixed, but it definitely hasn't been isolated. And moreover, there's no ownership here. The student's not hearing their interpretation, but with the staccato fix, what they're hearing is that they're listening to you play well. And that's a whole different thing. And somewhere in there is staccato. Now, the whole point behind reality distortion is to give you a third way of being able to communicate improvements that you want the student to make. And when you do this demo, what the student will be hearing is themselves, but slightly improved. All right, let's just have a look at how this works. Because again, as soon as you're able to record with MIDI, the technology for this is there immediately. We go back to, remember the exam we passed before, we all became radiologists, and congratulations, and that's all good. And we know how to read these vertical lines and horizontal bars and whatever. Composers, again, when they're using this, you can edit all of this stuff. You can make these lines shorter or longer, or you can drag them to the left or the right to make them in time or out of time. You can make notes quieter or louder by drag in. There's ways of doing it. Just click on it and drag it up, or make it louder. Click on it, drag it down. It'll make it quieter, which means that we can mock up very specific improvements to what they just did, and keep everything else that they just did. Because the only thing we're going to change is this one thing we want to fix. Out of the 76 things that we could fix right now, we've chosen to focus on this. And so right now we're going to hear this in isolation. And so we're able to say, look, here is what your Mozart would sound like if you kept everything you did, but we just got rid of that thumb bump. All right. And so very quickly, it would take 2 or 3 seconds. I would select all those notes. I'd make all those thumb notes there that you can see in dark brown. I'd make them a little bit quieter just by dragging down. And everything else would stay the same. The pedaling would stay the same. The timing problems would stay the same. And what we've got now is a version of them, which is exactly the same, but now the thumb bump has been fixed. All right. And then they've got a reason, they can hear this. They've got a reason now for going away and working on it. And then once we've targeted that for a bit, we can go, okay, all right, now here is a snapshot of you. We'll keep the thumb bump fixed. Now let's add in an even left hand and hear what that sounds like. Now, we've been doing a variation of this for years, and that is to encourage them to play an even left hand. But if they were able to produce that as their own demonstration right now, it's probably something you didn't need to work on in the first place. The reason this left hand looks like this is because they manifestly cannot play an even left hand just now. And so you can nudge these notes, you can make it completely even, and then you can A/B them, let them hear the difference between the two. And now we're both, again, looking at the same thing and working on the same improvement. So instead of saying, look, please fix this, we're giving them a reference recording of them where it is fixed. And so it's like their future self after there's been some practice. And importantly, then the difference between this and showing you yourself is this feels achievable, because this is 99% what they're already doing. All the rest of the stuff is them already, but it clearly sounds better. So it's motivating at the same time. Now, this is not just useful for troubleshooting. It means that you can run experiments for how things possibly could sound as trying to sort out whether it's a goal worth pursuing or not, long before the student can actually do it. And so the student can play you a particular passage, and you can say, because you want this to be what the next 5 weeks are about, I'm loving most of what you're doing. I'm just wondering what this would sound like if it was 25% faster. Now, again, a sentence we've said many times, you spend 5 seconds with the recording that is made, you can make it 25% faster and you can play it back and they can hear it for themselves. Now, they can't do that yet, but you've both been standing there looking at the same target, and now you've both got the same thing in mind and a reason for wanting to do it. And so they can assess variations and interpretations that they can't even play yet. Which again, I'm struggling to think of a way that they could do that now. And again, your demonstrations, for the reasons we talked about before, are not going to cut it. They're going to be too multidimensional. So combining this now with the fact that we've got a recording studio of some sort, or some way of being able to record your students. We've got 4 takes here. We can talk to the student and we can say to them, okay, which of these takes had your favorite opening and why? And the value in this conversation is in the conversation itself. It's not in the outcome. And so there'll be all sorts of discussions about, clearer pedaling, or one of them felt like it was rushing or whatever else. And then these become values that you can share and take away to other pieces. Which one is your favorite opening? So we can make a list then. And then we say, okay, all right, and what about the middle section? And what about the end? And so we then have these segments, which are the basis of an idealized version. And then simply by cutting up and rearranging the recordings you've got, you can produce this. Now, we were talking before about a version of the student that is at their very best. This looks a little bit like cheating, because what we've done, this was never done in one take. This was reassembled from several takes, but every commercial recording you've ever listened to, and part of the reason that we hear, and this terrible disconnect there is between what we as mere mortals can do and what superstars on commercial recordings do, that they can do. Do you know how many takes somebody like Christian Zimmerman would do before he would eventually agree to assembling something out of 45 different bits of it? And so that's exactly what's going on here. This is useful in a couple of different ways. You can take this recording and then now use it as the showcase recording in its own right. And for some students, you'll do that. And as long as you've got the 2 cameras, you can do that. No one will be any the wiser. For other students, you're going to say to them, no, that's not good enough. What we've got here is powerful evidence of what you are able to do when everything clicks. We're not there yet. I want to keep on working so that you are able to actually produce something like this, a version of this piece which has the opening we talked about from take 1, the section immediately after from take 2, and so on all the way through, to create this kind of super version of they're playing at their very best. And as far as they're concerned, that's able to be represented not in terms of takes or numbers. It's the things they liked about each section. I liked the fact that number 1 was a little bit faster. I liked the fact that segment 2 there, you could hear the melody a little more clearly. And so they've got values they're chasing, and they just happen to be the same things that you'd want them to be chasing as well. And so you can then send that student home, not with an idealized recording that's going to go on their YouTube channel, but an aspirational recording. It's now something that they can actually work towards, and it becomes a reason to practice. You can also use this to test drive alternatives. And so some students will be torn that I really like the clarity of take 2. I like the additional tempo of take 1. I wish take 2 was a little bit faster. Okay, so assemble your alternative version where that's the case. And now we've got 2 versions side by side. And the question is, you might even end up with half a dozen of these. How do you choose? And so straight away, you can feel the conversations and lessons so different from the conversations which are based around how are you going to nail this arpeggio so that you're just not going to miss it when it matters. Instead, the conversation is, out of the 6 different things that you did that was so good, which one do you actually think is the very best and why? And that becomes the springboard for conversations. So the question then, now we're going to return to the question that was asked a little while ago, is how do we help students choose wisely when they're doing this? And so that's where we actually need the next room. So in the room we're in now, you can take what students already do, you can augment it a little bit. In the next room, students are going to be able to, without you being there, are going to be able to help themselves to some guidance and some ideas on the countless choices they're going to need to make, particularly if they are doing recordings of their own at home as well. So this idea of a self-help library, almost all of you would be working with in some form of your life. So I know that there's some gym equipment, for example, that after you've purchased the equipment, inside the box will be YouTube channels where there'll be 1,000 different exercises that you can do with this, for example. That Dorico product that I was talking about before, the music notation, again, they've got a whole library of videos for how to use things. My accountant has got libraries of seminars that I never watch on how you can do various things with money that I'm not interested in, and so the help is there if I need it is the point. That's why it's on demand, and some of your students like me with the accountant won't demand it, but the point is it's there if you want, and it's studio members only. And so it becomes another reason for remaining in your studio, because your access to this, of course, is conditional upon you being a member of the studio. And there's ways to set up that. If you Google setting up membership websites, again, it's stupidly easy because companies know that it has to be stupidly easy now for people to take advantage of it. So if you want to do this sort of thing, it's not hard to do. And again, I'm not going to recommend particular products necessarily. So the aim here is to support students as they practice at home. We're going to do two things here. We're going to do the repertoire guides that you've done a million times. So if you think about, we've all got favorite pieces that we teach. And as part of having favorite pieces that we teach, we all have introductions that we use time and time and time again. Instead of giving that introduction, using up lesson time, you would record some of these introductions or ideas or tips or whatever as little video recordings, and then add them to your self-help library. So that's the first thing we're going to add. The second thing we're going to add is some past performances from other students, some model performances from other students in the studio. They'll all be very different from each other. We'll look at why in a second. But let's take a look at an example of this. So let's imagine we've got a student who's doing the Wild Horseman, Shimon. And so they go to the self-help library because right now they're downstairs. Otherwise, they've been downstairs in the practice room practicing by themselves, and reaching a point where they're just looking for a bit of guidance, wondering if maybe the idea they've got is a little bit too fast. Does anybody else actually play it like this? All right, so let's find out. We go to the self-help place section of your studio, and up the top, we've got all the tips that you've put together, these little videos that you've made, which are, when you first make them, that there's some work to do. Although remember, if you're already set up to do video recording, you're already set up to do video recording. And so this becomes much, much, much easier if that's just all ready to go at any time. And so these videos get added to over time. But the point is, once you put a video up, a video that you add this year can be guiding a student in 15 years' time. These aren't the sort of things that age ungracefully. So you can constantly add to this, and it becomes more valuable over time. It frees up lesson time, because now this is a list of things that you don't need to have conversations about in lessons anymore, because these conversations are now available online anytime, which means that you can talk about some of the other things we've been talking about, like choosing between takes or why did you prefer A to B or whatever else. If populating this looks like an enormous job, then combine with other teachers. An organisation like APTA, for example, could put out their own. Where if teachers are contributing 4 or 5 videos each to particular pieces, this grows, and it grows fast, and then that's there as a resource for students to be able to access. Down the bottom there, you can see we've got some model past performances for the students to refer to, again, to help answer that question that I posited before of, am I taking this too fast? Does anybody else seriously do a decrescendo here? I reckon it should have one, but there's nothing in the score. And add to that, you can still do those things even if a student hasn't done it before. I'm fine with that as well. But it can be reassuring to see that there's more than one way to skin these particular cats. And so we've got 4 very different versions of the piece down here, but they're all versions that actually worked. And better still, from a PR point of view, these are all your students, by the way, that people get to hear. This is what spending time in your studio produces, and that's not bad PR either. So how do you do this? The easiest way to do this is just simply to have your own YouTube channel. Is not to fuss about if I go back, not to fuss about all these fancy layouts, but simply to have your own YouTube channel where you can divide it up, and you can have a playlist which is your hints and tips, and another playlist which is idealized performances. And then if a student wants to find that particular piece by Schumann, I can't remember what it is now, they can search for it. And so that's easy enough to do. Otherwise, there are plenty of web builders that some of you might be familiar with, things like Wix or Squarespace or Webflow, which they're designed idiots to be able to build web pages, which we are. We're music teachers. We're building web pages, not our thing. And so they've deliberately made that very easy. If you want the most control over how it all looks, you'll probably need something like WordPress or Avada. And again, if these are all just sounding like names and glossing over at the moment, I'll provide these later. But these are all ways of being able to quickly and easily build a website of some sort. And the easiest way outside of the YouTube channel to populate this is just with a simple website. That's all. And to make sure that it's easy enough to update. And part of the reason, by the way, that you will find it easy is because almost all of these companies have got their own members own section filled with videos and how-to guides. So in any case, it works. Right, so let's skip ahead now. We're going to take a look at Studio Archives. This is closely related. We actually could put this in the same room, in fact, Studio Archives. But the idea behind this room is that this is a space you go where you get to relive performances by past students. The difference here being this is not just curated students. This is every performance you've recorded ever, not just the excellent ones. They're all in there. And basically, it's how a student signs off on a piece. So that they probably have their own page somewhere with all the growing portfolio of stuff they've done. But here now is studio-wide. You can see everything any student has ever done. And there's a few ways you can structure it. One way is that you still might choose to have a section that highlights outstanding performances. So we go back to the Wild Horseman again. That's what it was called. We go back to the Wild Horseman again. And here we've got a page full of stand-up performances. And you'll recognize this from our self-help guide before. There are some of those on here. There's some more as well. And so we've chosen one which we think was better than all others. And then we've got some other excellent ones over here. And they're all quite different from each other. Now, this is good for a couple of things. This is good for window shopping. This is for students who have got something coming up, a recording or a recital. I'm not saying don't do recitals anymore. I'm saying, for goodness sake, pick the students where that's their thing, and they can still do those. You're still going to have end-of-year recitals and competitions to aim for and whatever else, but it'll be the right students. So when people are picking pieces for whatever it is that they're doing, now they can window shop, and they can hear that, they're not listening to F. Janie Kisson playing it on YouTube and absolutely making it transcendental. They're listening to other students playing it in a believable but excellent fashion. And so these are good examples here. It's a great motivator too, by the way, because your students are going to want to end up on this page because they know not everybody is. And so the 7 students that we've got here are delighted. Of course, being a web page, it doesn't all have to fit on the page. You can scroll things. And so if another excellent performance comes along, fine, add it. And after time, you might discover if you've got a piece that you teach over and over again, you might end up with a couple of dozen performances that you thought were worthy of inclusion in something like this. This might also be part of the public-facing part of your website as well. When parents are considering joining in the first place, it doesn't hurt if you've got something as comprehensive and as readily indicative of excellence as this would be. But again, remember, you know it's excellent because you curated what's here. Some of the best lessons that you do, though, and some of the best learning that the student will do by themselves is not from the best ones, it's from the ones that aren't so good. As you start to reverse engineer, why is it that this is a little bit clunky? And they're good conversations to have, but you do want to protect the dignity of the performer. So it doesn't want to look like this with names and dates and whatever else. Instead, you could do something like this. So here we've got 18 different performances, all the different performances the Wild Horse that have happened over the past 5 years that you've recorded. Some of these are excellent. Some of them, they're all the students' very best. They're their finest moments. It's just that some of these finest moments, not all students are equally talented. And so students are able to say, look, number 9, I just don't understand why it feels like it's dragging all the time. Well, it is, but we're not embarrassing any students with any names on there. And so the process of reverse engineering what it is that students like and don't like about the things that they're hearing go enormously to informing how is it they want to play this, by defining it sometimes in terms of how they don't want to play it. So this can also, leaving aside the not so good performances in here, this can provide alternative interpretation ideas. So they will hear ways of delivering the piece that won't have occurred to them and that you may not have raised in lessons necessarily. And there's no reason, by the way, that you can't have multiple submissions from the same student in here. So for our student who wants a tender lyrical version of this, but they also wanted a version, they thought it sounded kind of cool when it moved forwards, we'll record a version of both. And then they can both get added to your Wild Horseman. Hey, if it's good enough, they might both end up being as showcase performances. So another possibility, particularly for those who are using this for interpretation ideas, is you can then flag and signpost this a little bit to steer your students' thinking in particular directions. So here we are. We've got 8 different performances of the Wild Horseman. Of course, they're all going to be completely different from each other. And so for our student who's not just window shopping for pieces, but is window shopping for ideas for how to deliver pieces, here's a bunch of different possibilities, and they're all good. All of these students were showcased on our front page. All right, but what makes them different? Top left here, we can see first student performed the piece with no pedal. Second student performed the piece. There was loads of pedal in there. They both worked. Listen to them both, see what you think is better. We've got a fast and light versus slow and expressive under that. Over on the right-hand side up the top, we've got a student who observes every mark dynamics. And if it says commence the crescendo on the second note of the second bar, that's when it'll start, not one note earlier. versus Lars, who's next to him here, who really not only made up his own dynamics in this particular performance, which you'll always remember, but his dynamics were never the same in two performances, but it was always compelling. And so that's a good thing for students to hear as well. You are not steering them in any particular direction. You're presenting both of these as possibilities. But if you do want to steer them in a particular direction, don't present them both as possibilities. And so you can provide false dilemmas here, where the only options you put up are options that you've kind of pre-approved and are happy with. And then the student from that limited menu, that doesn't feel like a limited menu to them, it feels like a world of possibilities. They can then choose and kind of shape their own piece. So in the past, students would take pride in their live performances, assuming those performances are going well. Now they can take pride in their recordings. And so that's the shift here, and it all ends up somewhere in the studio archives. We'll do one more, and then I actually will throw exclusively to questions, in fact. And this is a very quick tour, because this could be a book in its own right, of the game design studios, and this is the quick tour. This is to answer the question. I was speaking a moment ago about students feeling good about themselves and what it is that has them feeling proud. Right at the start of this, I put 3 words out that mean something very different now. We had like and follow and subscribe. And the benchmarks for success, or at least the metrics for success, are different than they were 20 years ago. All of your students are familiar with computer games, and I would argue that most of them spend a huge amount of time and are very familiar with the different tropes and mechanics of computer games. And computer game designers are spectacularly good at getting and keeping the attention of young people and motivating them to spend hours doing something. And they're good at doing that because it's their core business. And it's not accidental. We were talking about behavioral psychologists before. The principles of behavioral psychology that are at play when we're looking at what makes things addictive, so that students will keep coming back and trying this again and again and again, or signing up for a subscription-based MMORPG and still playing it 2 or 3 years later and playing it for 4 or 5 hours every day. The only way that you can do that is if you are very, very good at engaging students, and game designers aren't. So we've got a thing or two to learn from them. And so, leaving music aside for a moment, I said at the outset that I'm not teaching piano these days. I run a martial arts studio, so I've got around about 180 students that I'm responsible to every week. And to keep them facing in the same direction and to keep them motivated, had to do the same sort of thing for the martial arts program that I've been recommending that you do now. And so assessments in martial arts were traditionally based around something called grading exams, which are kind of one-shot, very public, crash through or crash. If it goes well, it goes well. If it doesn't, you can try again in 6 months, kind of things. And so it's super high pressure, and some students absolutely thrive under that, and some students don't. What I've ended up doing was rebuilding it from the ground up and asking, okay, if a game designer were designing the progression system for all of this, what might they change? What might they keep? And then in the back of my head, and how could I end up using this for a piano studio again one of these days? And the very first thing they keep is they keep the belt system. The belt system is brilliant. All the students love working their way out through the colors. But what I've ended up doing is that for the martial arts program, every student's got their own web page, and at their own web page, they've got their own kind of progress. It charts everything they've done so far, everything that's coming up, and it stays with them from their very first lesson right through to black belt. And I'm showing you this now because the same sort of thing is reproducible in your music studio. And again, I don't have a particular product in mind, but using some of the tools we looked at before, you can build things like this. And the reason I know that is I've built this in WordPress, and I'm a web design idiot. I don't necessarily know lots about this. So I've hidden the name of the student because I don't have their permission for this. But you can see down here, it shows what belt they currently are. You can see, instead of there being a single exam which decides your next belt, I've replaced it straight out of computer games with achievements that you need to earn. And as soon as you have earned all the achievements for your yellow belt, whenever that happens to be, you are yellow belt and you're promoted straight away. And then your belt color will change up the top of your page, and then the next set of achievements will unlock. So you can see that this student here is a green stripe. And you know they finished all their green stripe achievements, but you can see next is green belt. They haven't finished all of those achievements. There's a progress bar so they can see how close they are to that. They're all familiar with how that works. And then from a teacher's point of view, the conversations we have are not about stuff that's ticked, it's about the stuff that's not. And so their practice, instead of kind of working in general on things, we can steer things towards the achievements they don't have yet. Some of those will be achievements we haven't tested yet. a lot of them will be achievements that they just can't do yet. And so that becomes the basis of training. You can see over here, the right-hand column, blue stripe, is locked. It's grayed out. And again, the mechanics students want to unlock things. And so you can bet that as soon as they've got the green belt, they're going to want the green stripe, the blue stripe next. That's fine. The achievements in that column, not only are there more of them, but they're harder. If we scroll down the page, and I'm not going to, but if we scroll down the page, you'd see intermediate class with its own achievements. And again, the list is longer, the achievements are more difficult, but the students always know exactly what it is they've got to do, right through to black belt. I spoke before about that Power Cube gadget that we have. Well, so we've got metrics for all of this now. And again, this sort of thing is reproducible, particularly if there's metrics in music. What are your scores like? And so the students have got numbers here. Numbers aren't always meaningful to everybody, so we color code this so that they can see. They know that green is good, but blue is better. And once you've got your blue, you want to get a yellow, and so on. And they're able to make comparisons, and they do. The very first thing that happens at lessons is that we end up with students with laptops out and iPads open, and they're comparing notes. How many achievements have you got to go to your next belt? What's your Power Cube score? Oh, I had you beaten last time, and now I don't. And of course, the next time the Power Cube comes out, those two students are competitive in a way that they wouldn't be if I didn't have the numbers, and I didn't used to have the numbers in front of them. And so, we're able to create leaderboards and whatever else. And there's a whole bunch of different metrics that you can apply that to in music as well, music or otherwise. And so this could have nothing to do with practicing. It just could be issues that are bugging you in the studio. And so if punctuality becomes a thing that is throwing your entire day off when students get it wrong, you create a leaderboard for that. And suddenly you've got students who are paying attention to it and never would have otherwise. And the reason they do is this is a currency that they are versed in. They're in a world of leaderboards and a positive reinforcement in this sort of fashion, and they're used to it and they respond to it. We want students have, I think there's 232 achievements when you first join before you get your black belt. By the time you are getting close, a countdown charts here, and we can see things steadily turning black as you get closer and closer. But of all of this, and I'll finish on this note and take some questions, this is my favorite section. And it's new and it's empty. And this is what you see when you get your black belt. And each one of these placeholders here is for a video. And the reason it's for a video is instead of your shining moment being that grading exam that you did 15 years ago, your shining moments endure. Because every time you do something in class where you are able to do something that perhaps other people around you aren't, or that I'd want to showcase to students of the future, or that I know you're going to be proud of, we're going to film it, we're going to put it up here. And over time, this is going to grow, and it becomes another reason for students to want to continue their training, even in martial arts, where it looks like you've got to the finish line. Of course, black belt is definitely not that. So in any case, I'm going to leave this here. I'll take some questions now. If you want to find me, there's two ways of doing that. I do urge you to go to that YouTube channel just to get your head around what might be possible with some recordings. Again, remembering that there's not a single acoustic piano harmed in the making of any of those videos. And it really does road test a kind of a pretty tough cross-section of music and things you'd never try on a digital piano normally. I mean, you just wouldn't. And I would not be giving you this advice before sample libraries. Digital pianos sound exactly the way you think they sound. Why digital piano manufacturers don't embed world-class sample libraries into their instrument is absolutely beyond imagining. I don't understand why they don't. But in any case, if you pair it up with one, suddenly it's transformed, and it's a dozen different pianos in one. Orchestration recipes under that is super niche. That's for anybody here who actually works with orchestration sample libraries. I put together courses on how to do all of that. But otherwise, that's about as far off topic as I'm going to get today, I think. Let's do some questions.
We just have one question up here right now. If anybody else has questions, please feel free to jump in. Someone just asked, I'm considering switching my students' Halloween piano recital via Zoom, which is like an online recital, to recordings. Yeah. Do you have any suggestions? I guess how to do that. Also, any suggestions for how to explain it to the parents?
My first reaction would be that Halloween's kind of soon. If you're not set up for this now, that could end up being a stressful deadline, but it could make a great deadline by which students could submit recordings, for example. So part of the advantage with recordings is they are asynchronous, and the day you make them definitely doesn't have to be the day that you showcase them.
Right.
And so the idea that you're collecting a bunch of Halloween themed recordings is fantastic now. And and I say fantastic now because it means the earlier you start, the better. But you don't have to be collecting them all at the same rate. And if you get a student whose submission is 5 weeks after everybody else's, if you've got a student preparing for a recital and they are ready for it 5 weeks after everybody else, that's game over. They sound like what we heard right at the start. But with recordings, you can accommodate that. And so they can get gently added to the mix. And then down the track, when you end up with a section of your studio portfolio, which is the Great Halloween Challenge of 2021, you can shoehorn a performance into that from a student who didn't record it until after Christmas. I don't know if that answered your question or not, but the idea that you could be doing it, particularly in an age of Zoom, as a, hey, look, submit your recordings and I'll put them up in one place for people to check them out at their leisure, rather than everyone at the same time watch this student. Now we'll switch over the camera. Now watch that student. I think is a better way of doing it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm sure there's some
cynical
good
also.
Either way with it. Yeah, so that's good. Well, it's just 3:32 so here. I understand you had some questions that you wanted to poll people. I don't know if we have time to do that, or how long.
I've got time if you guys have got time. There's
I think
like
maybe
4
if we
of them.
met maybe another 5 minutes, just because I know some teachers
give me
have
a
to go
second
teach
here.
right
I'm just showing the whole world everything I've got. Give me a second. I'll just stop screen sharing for a moment before you all take my credit card number. Give me a second here. Where is this? Right, am I screen sharing at the moment or not?
Yeah.
Yep, still, there it's up here. That's fine. Okay, all right, give me a second and I'll just bring this up.
Yeah, for 5 minutes over, that's fine. So that would be. I just know some teachers have to get out.
Yeah, that's all good. All right. It's just it's just a couple of things I'm curious about. And I'll just add to this, if there's a question, once you see the mechanics of this, that anybody else would want me to ask everybody on your behalf, we can get answers from everybody pretty much instantly. And so that all works a little bit like this. And I just need to hit that. Okay, so what you need to do is on your device is just go to the address there, menti.com. And then there's a code that you enter. And then once you've done that, you should see, let's go back to the code so you can actually see it. You should see the question I'm about to pose next. Can you guys see the Zoom interface at the top of the page or not? Only because it's masking things if you are, or is it just the screen?
No, I think it's okay. So it's menti.com.
So you can see the number up at the top.
Yeah.
So you can still see it. That's fine. Okay. All right. So just to test this right now, and I don't really need to know the answer to this, but if you can submit your answers to the following questions, I just want to make sure this actually works. I think for comic nerds, they're probably in different universes or something. I don't know how it works. My son would watch the movie. All right, so looks like this is all working reasonably well. I'll give people 30 seconds to lock in their answers, and then we'll move on to the questions we actually want to see. I'm just curious about a couple of things. And if you don't have a phone and can't take that, it doesn't actually matter too much. All right, so let's just move on to a couple of things. I'm just curious at the moment. Sort of informal survey. So we'll take about 10 seconds per question. Just to get a sense. Okay, that's interesting. Mine would have been purple. It was just over 20 years. Okay, all right. This, I'm super curious about this. Okay, this is not what I thought this looked like. Okay, so I'm not reacting too much to these. I'm just kind of taking things in at the moment. That's all. All right. Oh, and there's this one as well. By the way, I would have been in the hard left column, particularly when I first started teaching. And mandatory is a big call, by the way. I just think I might end up making it. All right. Okay, that is interesting. All right. And I know this is a very unscientific survey. And just curious now, you get to put in 3 different answers now. We'll go another 30 seconds or so because it takes a little while to type this in. I think I know who Busius is. I don't know some of these composers. So we'll say 15 more seconds to get your votes in. Who's this Chopin guy? He's doing pretty well. All right, and I think that might. Oh yes, I'm just curious. I'll give you might if I hear for at least one more time. Oh, yeah, there we are. Thank you. I'm really pleased to see that Furlise is actually winning so far, unless there's a late. Oh, actually, River Flows and You. All right. Okay. That very unscientific and possibly not useful. I was just curious. The main reason I'm showing you all of that, by the way, is not because I'm interested in the questions. It's because it's yet another way to be able to canvas feedback. And so we were talking about the Halloween concert before, for example, where you can get all your students pointing in the same place at the same time is that you can throw up a performance on here and then you get everybody to give feedback on it. Like they can just use their phones and give feedback live. Like that's another way of doing things and possibly easier than trying to manage juggling Zoom. But anyway, think for another time. Right, here for any more questions that you might have, but otherwise I think
we just had one here that'd probably be a good one to finish with. Just regarding the leaderboards, like online leaderboards, the teacher says, how do you get students and parents interested in them? I have a challenge board on my website and have sent it to parents when their child first made it on, but I don't feel as though they're enthusiastic about it. And I've had a similar experience with asking parents to go to the website to see various things, and half of them do, maybe. So is there a way to get parents and kids interested in the online?
We embed it pretty heavily. We embed it pretty heavily in lessons is one way. So one of the tricks that I'll use with a leaderboard is to make students aware of where they are, but also to make them very aware of where other people are, particularly people that they know, and then let competitive nature run its course. And so I know there's a lot of educational theory that recommends against the idea of creating competition. I deliberately create huge amounts of competition in the studio. As soon as I find that there are students who are working on things in parallel, I will usually make them aware of each other. And a vehicle for doing that certainly can be a leaderboard. In terms of the greater question of, is it possible that you can throw an initiative together and then no one cares about it? The answer to that question is absolutely yes as well. The leaderboards that I've got at the website are the ones that have endured. And the ideas that I had, that I think my ideas are all good when I try them, but the ideas where they just haven't flown with the students, So, for example, I put together a COVID challenge offline. I'm not teaching martial arts at the moment because most of Australia's locked down. And so I haven't been for about four months or so. And so I have put together things for the students to do at home, and some students are enthusiastically throwing themselves into that, and some just don't care. But the point is, it's there if they want to. And then over time, a sort of natural selection means that the ideas that gel end up sticking, and they're the ones you promote.
Yeah. Okay. Good. Well, thank you very much, Philip. I'm sure that there's some really good comments on the side here. People have really enjoyed it and found this very inspiring. Just even, I think, creating ideas of where you can go from here. You know, it's just kind of that little germ of an idea. And then we've got some wonderfully creative teachers that I think are going to do some things with this. So great. Thank you very much.
I think wonderfully creative teachers is a tautology, but so it's a profession that kind of invites that, yeah.
Yeah, that's great.
Yes.
So, okay. Well, thank you very much to all of our teachers too, and just the support for APTA and these webinars. It's been really great. So I appreciate that. And I hope that you have a good, now, am I saying this right? A good Saturday? Are you on Saturday, Philip?
Yeah, okay.
Yeah. We're not quite there yet. We got to get through Friday night. So anyway, I hope you have a great weekend. And to all the teachers, thanks so much for joining us.
All right, brilliant. Thank you. Many thanks.